Joshua Raymond Lee, David O. Rogers. You're the editors for the limited series Ripley, which is based on the title con artist character created by author Patricia Highsmith. Well, first off, how familiar were the two of you with the books and the various adaptations of the Ripley stories? We can start with Joshua.
Hey, Daniel, thanks. I was familiar in the first place probably with the Anthony Minghella film from the 90s. And then at some point between when that movie came out and now I read the book for the first time, I hadn't really been exposed to the other adaptations until I heard about this project. And then I kind of sought them out, specifically Purple Noon, the Alain Delon film from the 60s, was one that was a big inspiration going into this.
And David?
I actually had not seen the Matt Damon version when it came out. I don't know why. So once I knew I was going to be working on this Ripley, I read the book, and then I read the scripts, and then I saw the other adaptations. Anyway, yeah. So that's.
And then you read the entire Ripley series.
And then subsequently, as we were working on the show, I read the rest of the novels as well, which I recommend.
5. Yeah,
it's 5 total. Yeah.
And the series also has a feel of, classic film noir. Did you take inspiration from, any other classic films outside of the Ripley films for inspiration or reference, David?
I don't know. I think because, we were getting this footage, and once you really dig in, you have to sort of work with the footage that you have. So to me, I didn't think necessarily about how to, sort of hone to an existing style. It was more about trying to honor what we were getting, the pacing and the performances and stuff. So I didn't necessarily. Steve did mention to me at some point once we were in post, Divorce Italian Style, which I watched and loved. It's a great, funny movie, and it has. I think it is a kindred spirit to Ripley in terms of its look and time and place and everything. Yeah, in the end, you sort of build the puzzle that you're assigned to build, for me.
Yeah, but maybe on the side. I mean, not in terms of homework, but I think I'm always looking at old movies. I think I was watching Laura, the Hollywood film noir from the 40s, around the beginning of this process, and some other pre-war like Italian and French cinema, which I think is probably was a point of reference for Robert in terms of the way he shot, especially wide shots of Rome and other Italian locations. It's very grand and very just kind of refined in its composition, and those older pre-war films from Europe.
Did the two of you work together on all 8 episodes, or did you divide episodes between you? How did that work out?
Well, Dave actually began before I did in production, and I started at the end of production. So the first passes of many things were done by Dave, and also Lillian Pachter, who's our first assistant editor, and also did some additional editing on the series. So when I started in post, I sort of had this different dictate from Steve to take like fresh cracks at assembling many of the episodes, not all 8, but I think like 5 of them, just as an exercise to have someone with a completely fresh perspective kind of approach the whole thing chronologically, also not in the order in which it was shot, but just to take it right then. Nearly everything was shot. I was starting a few weeks before production wrapped, and just trying to put something together based on the script quickly, which was a really strange and different exercise to do as an editor, but I think it produced some fruitful results. And then we took a combination of that work and the initial assembly work that Dave and others had done, and kind of went forward by combining those in different ways. And then they're sort of like separated out into certain episodes that Dave was mainly responsible for, and some that I was mainly responsible for. But essentially, the entire thing was like an 8-hour-long feature film, one writer-director, with a very exacting amount of control over the whole process. So it was essentially like we were working on one project together. even if some responsibilities fell to one or the other of us.
And of course, working with Steven Zalian across the entire series, like what was that collaborative process like? What was he like in the editing room, David?
Well, he is um, very in tune to everything, every component of filmmaking, and that's what you anything you see, meaning the pencil holder on the desk and the things that are hanging on the wall and all of that. Like when you in during production, he would be very meticulous and come into the frame sometimes and move things around to get things just right for both wide and close shots. And then the sound of things is also very important to him, and he's in tune to all of that. So you really build this, like it's really a big part of this is the details, you know, the way things sound, the footsteps and yeah, and as well as the dialogue and the editing and where you can contract or expand things, you know. So it's sort of this there's not a detail in a moment in this show that hasn't been vetted and examined and worked on, you know.
Yeah, I've never worked with a filmmaker who was capable of homing in on every single facet of filmmaking, from production design down to the nitty gritty, like final visual effects. You know, we were doing on lots of shots in the show, and that's definitely a superpower of his is like a big picture, having a mind for the big picture, and really being able to get into the weeds and all of the crafts of filmmaking. And I was just remembering as you were speaking, Dave, one insert shot where I think the camera was just rolling along series insert of some objects on a table, and Steve was adjusting them, letting the camera roll, adjusting them, letting the camera roll. And he's doing this for about 5, 6, 7 minutes. And then at some point, Steve says, and we could hear him on the mic going like, I'm just going to keep doing this until you guys tell me to stop. And he's just going for as many possible options as for post.
And you know, we see the world mostly through Tom Ripley's point of view. How much does the nature and personality of that character like influence the editing choices you're making, the pacing, you know, how you approach things, Joshua?
Andrew's performance or the actor's performances?
The performance and sort of the nature of the character, that kind of sinister, you know, methodical quality. Does that come into the editing?
Yeah, I think I thought about this while working on it, and I also have heard it from people who've watched the series since, that the reactions are really essential in this story, and so much of how we understand who Tom is, and the fact that he is suspect and a bit sinister is less by what he's doing initially and more by how people are judging him silently. You know, like the teller in the bank when he's trying to pass off forged checks, or the woman at the American Express office who thinks she might have seen him the day before. You know, all these slightly suspicious or off-kilter looks from strangers at him, I think, are part of how the viewer starts to understand that he's just not a normal person. And that was really, I mean, obviously, like, reaction shots are the most fun to play within the edit because it's all about context and juxtaposition. You can really take any piece of a performance and make it work in a way that maybe the actor didn't intend it, or maybe they did, but just by putting it around or in between things, you can really make it mean something different.
David, how about you?
Well, yeah, I mean, Andrew Scott's performance is amazing, and there was a lot of it, and so to hone it for the overall whole series, you know, scene to scene, and then episode, and then the series, is definitely a big undertaking. But I think it really started with his performance, you know, like which, yeah, it was kind of an embarrassment of riches, you know, because he gave us what we needed, you know. And there's variances, and that's where you have to work on the tone and how much you're going to show of this, or how much does he give away here, or is he too friendly here, or is he, you know. But yeah, it all started with Andrew's performance. Yeah.
And I think in addition to the principal cast, a lot of credit is due to all of the minor roles played by Italian actors who are just so, I mean, there's so many really gifted actors from specific regions throughout Italy that, Steve was meticulous about casting people with the proper regional accents from the right locations. And so many of those actors just give such humor and, realism and everything to the story and to shaping who Tom is by their reactions to him.
Definitely. Yeah. All the hotel clerks,
Yeah.
all unique and interesting, and yeah.
A spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the series. I want to talk about a couple of specific scenes and pivotal moments on the show, how you approached them. Starting with, I think, one of the best sequences of the entire season, the entire series, where Tom is backed into a corner and ends up killing Dickie Greenleaf, out on the boat. And we see the process of him committing the crime, trying to cover up the crime, this whole process. How was that? What was the approach to that scene like?
Well, I think it was scripted. All of that stuff, the process was scripted, but also an adaptation of the book, which is amazing. Like, to me, the book, when you read it, I remember reading it and thinking, did Patricia Highsmith kill somebody? Like, how does she know, these kinds of details? But and so I think we sort of built it and then started to chip away at the block of marble to try to get what we needed out of it. But we tried, they shot the conversation part of it with Tom and Dickie with different angles, some high angles and things like that. So we had a couple different versions going to see how it felt. But in the end, I think it just played better, kind of more straight because of what it was. Like, you didn't need to do anything tricky with cameras, because the tension was there between the two of them, and for me, it was really came from watching episodes 1 and 2 that made episode 3 work for me. And so I don't know. I think for me, what's one of the nicest things about it is the suddenness of the murder itself, because it kind of comes. We are almost doing it ourselves, because that first swing comes just in a shocking way that I think is very effective.
And yeah, there's not no music in that scene. There's not a lot of dialogue, obviously, because Tom Ripley is by himself after the murder. How do those factors sort of affect the editing work?
Yeah, I think those scenes, I think it was like pretty obvious before I think any of us even talked about it with Steve or even with each other, that those scenes belonged in silence, both that murder scene and the murder scene in 5, which is kind of complementary. They're both about half of the length of an episode. And just to properly put ourselves in the mindset of Tom and the way in which the action suddenly arrested, from the way we normally move through time in a narrative film is like elliptical. And then this murder, like Dave said, happens kind of suddenly out of nowhere, and suddenly time halts to a stop and moves at almost like a completely realistic pace. That sort of dictated that it needed to play as dry and realistically as possible. So then the focus became on sound. And like in the boat scene, we started to treat sound, give it realism, but also try to give it an emotional component by making the boat have a bit of a character in the way it moved and sounded like kind of a growl, as if it was an animal, or so that it was a foe for Tom. And eventually, and we foreshadow it a little bit as soon as the boat kind of is introduced, so that by the time it's knocking him over the head in the water, it sounds really aggressive, like an animal. So basically sound ended up being taking over as maybe what the emotional aspect that normally comes from music was doing in the scene.
And you mentioned that other major murder scene in the series, episode 5, where Ripley kills Freddie Miles. That time, he's trying to cover up for murder, same kind of situation, but in much different circumstances. He's in this apartment building. He's trying to do this in public. Many more witnesses involved. How does the approach to that scene differ from the approach to the boat scene?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I think again, that the use of sound was important. The building needed to feel full of people, and the street outside needed to be audible, so that that being an obstacle for Tom would be apparent. So we worked on filling out the whole landscape of sound around him in that apartment, which was a soundstage set, with the help of Larry Zipf, our sound designer, who recorded, and Mish, our ADR supervisor, who recorded Italian actors, loop groupers, speaking in the hallways, and then they processed it by re-recording it through a long staircase chamber to get the quality of the hall. And again, the space there, like instead of the boat, in the case of this scene, I think the elevator and the hallway, the marble hallway, play, and then the Fiat Cinquecento car all kind of play as these characters in that episode that are major foes to Tom.
And don't forget about the cat as well.
Oh,
the only witness, and well, no, not the only witness, but yeah,
key witness.
Yeah, key witness.
Another silent witness who can't speak up.
Yeah.
And in general, when approaching a project, what inspires you the most about a project coming into it as editors? What really excites you about the process, David?
Well, it starts with the script, and you start to think about how this is going to come to life. And then you have to start to build it with the materials that they shoot. So I don't know that I have a particular standard approach, because every show has its own particular style, whether it's dialogue driven or more visual like this one. So I don't know. It depends on the show, I guess.
Joshua?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's about the script. And what excited me about this one was Steve's writing, both for its humor and just the way he writes dialogue, which is so relatable and funny and interesting, and dark. But then the way these scripts added up to about 500 pages, and the fact that there were 100 of those pages that were just single-spaced scene description, made me realize, oh, this is going to be a really interesting project, because it's all going to come down to the cinema of it, to the techniques that he employs to capture it on camera, and then to what we would have to play with and discover in post. And that turned out to be very true in this case. It's Steve, who started as an editor, is especially kind of bold and fearless about reworking things in post, and he's not very precious about his scripts, even though we would refer to them constantly to remind ourselves of what intentions were. There was a lot of play and experimentation throughout the process of post, which was about 2 years.
Well, I want to congratulate you both on your work on the series, and thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Daniel. Same.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks so much.